of the Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies Institute. Asian Century na tayo kasi ngayon sa 21st century. Welcome, Mr. Laurel, for your opening statement. Magandang umaga po. Magandang umaga po sa lahat. Good morning to everyone and to Asia and to the world. Itong pangyayari sa Pelosi Taiwan incident ay malaking bagay po sa kasaysayan ng mundo at ng Asia. I will just read in English the paper that I prepared, which represents in general the position of two think tanks, the Philippine BRICS Strategic Studies Institute at saka yung pangalawang nabanggit na po ni Wilson dito, yung Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute Incorporated. These are both registered foundations. Okay, simulan po natin. Ang pagkakat po ng paper na ito ay US quote-unquote forever war ends with Pelosi Chai stunt of gimmick. When U.S. Secretary of State Blinken called China's military drills around Taiwan, quote-unquote, significant escalation, he apparently forgets that, in fact, the U.S. media speculated on worse scenarios, such as Pelosi's planes being forced down on some airfield before reaching Taiwan, and some Western media even cheered China to do it. China staged a calibrated series of actions aimed at delivering an unmistakable message to the United States that things will no longer be the same if, when, and after Nancy Pelosi landed in Taipei. China's 4-day military drills, now extended to 15 days military drills, simulating the blockade of Taiwan, made sure Washington now clearly understands the message loud and clear. We need to flash back on a similar situation in 1995 when China asked a provocative invitation from Cornell University for Taiwan leader Li Tenghui to speak on quote-unquote Taiwan democratization experience. Although the U.S. State Department then opposed the Li visit, the U.S. Congress then as now forcibly allowed Li to visit. Parang yung nangyari ngayon. Ayaw daw ni Biden, pero Pelosi, as a Speaker of the House, still went on with it. China then has now conducted protest military drills with accompanying missile test firing. The U.S. in response staged the largest display of American military might in Asia since the Vietnam War, with the USS Belleau Wood, followed by the USS O'Brien and USS McCloskey, and finally the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier, transiting the Taiwan Strait from July on to December 1995. 6 warships ang humamon sa China. Winning the battle without fighting. This is what we have seen now. This time around, China's military exercises positioned all around Taiwan, effectively blockading the Taiwan island and cutting off civilian sea and air traffic in and out of Taiwan
Recording
for
in
the duration
progress.
of the 4-day military exercises. And firing off a dozen missiles as of this writing, some crossing over Taiwan Island and some splashing down in Japan's EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone, to the consternation of the U.S. vassal Japan. China's final message in this aspect to both the U.S. and the young belligerent voters of Taiwan: the U.S. can no longer sail its sea forces around the Taiwan Strait when China closes it. Hence, the U.S. security commitments are worthless. And of course, that's relevant to us because there are commitments in the Mutual Defense Treaty which are worthless when a crisis comes. On top of that, China also banned up to 2,000, and now the latest report is 5,000 exports of Japan or Taiwan to China to remind the misguided pro-independence groups that Taiwan's prosperity depends on the People's Republic of China. After 27 years, China has finally won the battle for the Taiwan Strait, achieving control over it against the US in what can be deemed as a fulfillment of Sun Tzu's quote, winning the war without fighting, unquote, forcing the US now to seek de-escalation and resumption of dialogue and cooperation. This is a victory for the world, preventing further escalation of the US warmongering in the region. Without outside intrusion, peaceful reunification is inevitable. Every nation seeks territorial integrity and national unity. Only the small DPP, Democratic Progressive Party of Taiwan, clique, sustained by the US arms sales draft. Kaya lang nagpupuhay po sa DPP, yung kanilang kabig mula sa around $10 billion annual military sales ng US to Taiwan. Okay.
10 billion.
10 billion, but I did not include it because I have to be more specific. But in general, I'm just stating that. Okay, and distortion of history inculcated by Taiwan media and the educational system, like Hong Kong, that breeds a base among the youth. China buys over 40% of Taiwan's export each year and growing. Sans, meaning without external meddling, this destines over time peaceful reintegration of Taiwan and China. The Western powers led by the United States have for centuries sought to contain China, abort its rise, and spearheading of Asia's rise. Ang China ang laging nangunguna sa pag-angat din ng Asia over the 1,000 years that has passed. Taiwan and other islands around it in southern Delhi have been key containment points. The United States attacked Taiwan in 1867, killing Taiwanese. Of course, I can narrate the history, but this is just a short paper. The United States supported Japan's invasion of Taiwan in 1874, and the United States sold weapons to Japan in the first Sino-Japanese War that forced China to cede Taiwan to Japan. Kaya na-colonize po ng ang Taiwan ng Japan for a while dahil sa tulong ng Estados Unidos din. So, we can see this struggle for the Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait has been going on for centuries. It has only been 73 years from China's 1949 revolution to this day. China has risen from one of the poorest backward nations to the world's top economy, and far overall in military power with the major powers. At the cutting edge of technology, and most importantly, leading the world to a harmonious community of shared future where mankind can cope. The alternative to the West forevermore. The Pelosi charade allowed China to assert its ascendance. Then it upped the ante, cutting off military dialogue talks, cooperation on climate change, and direct sanctions on Speaker Nancy Pelosi and family, highlighting the transgressions and lies from the non-existent Tiananmen Square massacre, Hong Kong human rights violations, and Xinjiang quote-unquote genocide, which the UN Commissioner on High Refugees recently, Chief Michelle Bachelet, recently debunked. With the latest diplomatic and geopolitical shock moves emanating from the Pelosi-Taiwan Strait crisis, came the opportunity for China to turn the tables on the United States. Now it is the US seeking, quote-unquote, de-escalation of China's crescendo of punitive diplomatic, economic, and political measures against the US. China will now always negotiate with the US from a firm position of strength. This is the last segment. Asia and the world is safer now. The Philippines, China, and the US. The Philippines has been used by the United States for many decades now as a cohort to the US imperialist wars in Asia, from the Korean War to the Vietnam War. President Ferdinand Edwin Marcos Sr. gradually broke the dependency relations with the United States, culminating in the opening up to the socialist states and the establishment of diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China in 1975. 11 years passed since 1975. Since the Philippine-China Entente, the U.S. ousted Marcos Sr. in a 1986 regime change. The return with Cory to the neo-colonial status survived 30 years until 2016, when the Filipino nation voted President Rodrigo R. Duterte, who thereupon declared, quote-unquote, separation from the United States. Succeeding Duterte is President Marcos Jr., Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr., who has declared China as the country's quote-unquote strongest partner. China in the past decade has been passive in the face of U.S. pressure and intimidation. From containment by 800 U.S. military bases ringing its territory, the U.S. pivot Asia, shifting 60% of its military forces to Asia, the slanders on the 1989 Tiananmen events, for Taiwan Straits crisis, and the 2019 Hong Kong democracy riots, the Xinjiang genocide, and the trade war destruction. This has changed. The geopolitical and military equation in Asia vis-a-vis Western imperialism has culminated in a decisive, quote-unquote, war without fighting, winning a war without fighting. War without fighting victory for the peaceful Asian power China against the 100 years domination of Asia by the warmongering United States. This Pelosi-China stunt begins the final decline of U.S. power in Asia, which makes it now safer to continue its economic recovery and pursuit of prosperity. President Marcos Jr. reads the signs correctly. President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. in an unequivocal terms by words and deeds, stressed the intention to quote unquote elevate Philippine-China ties to a higher level, while still keeping cordial relations with the U.S., receiving all its diplomatic representations, and in the talks with visiting U.S. State Department Secretary Anthony Blinken. Marcos told Blinken, quote unquote, the mutual defense treaty is in constant evolution. I'd like to think of it. So what does that mean? He's still going to think about it. I think that's the final word at this point, although several media outlets interpret it the other way around. President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. is more Sphinx-like, mahirap basahin, with the Americans than President Rodrigo Duterte certainly ever was, who spoke to them like a sledgehammer. Marcos Jr. is certainly more inscrutable, by mahirap basahin, than President Ferdinand Edwin Marcos when he told the U.S. Congress that Filipinos would already be dying while the U.S. Congress debated if they would abide by the commitment under the Mutual Defense Treaty. The Philippines echoes as its foreign policy, quote unquote, friend to all, enemy to none. But is that a true reflection of independence? Aristotle said, quote unquote, a friend to all is a friend to none. In that, quote unquote, one cannot have with all the people the same friendship that is based in virtue and character, unquote. Yung tunay na kaibigan ay kaibigan na batay sa virtue, kabutihan. Isn't it time the Philippines choose the quote-unquote good friend? We have had 100 years to judge the United States, enough time to declare an enemy of peace as an enemy of all. To achieve this, the Philippines must begin the final disengagement from the warmongering and fading superpower and be one with mankind's campaign to build a new world of quote-unquote forever peace. Against the West's forever wars, quote-unquote. This begins by finally ending the scam that is the Mutual Defense Treaty and banishing the Visiting Forces Agreement and the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the US. And on the ICC, I provide you an opinion piece in a third world website memo. Ang pamagat, the ICC is a tool of the arrogant imperialist world. And you can read this. Maybe I'll just read one paragraph. If I did not, have I taken more than 5 minutes? Not yet. Sobra na?
Yes, maybe one paragraph. Yes.
One paragraph.
To summarize, so we can open the floor.
Okay, ito. Sabi nitong paper na to. Let's consider what is currently going on in Ukraine. For example, there are calls for Russian President Vladimir Putin to be taken to the ICC and charged for war crimes. Barely 3 months into the war, yet we have all witnessed what has been going on for years in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Yemen. But everybody has kept quiet. Numerous war crimes have been committed in these countries, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, the true casualty figure will probably be never known. Of people who have been killed, yet there's never been any serious cause for the ICC to prosecute those responsible. And the only time the ICC tried to prosecute the war crimes of the US in Afghanistan, the US threatened to sanction the ICC staff. Ayan po ang aking presentasyon itong araw na ito.
Thank you very much to Mr. Herman Laurel for opening statement. Next, we'd like to invite for his opening statement. Suggest we make our opening statement short lang kasi we want to spend more time with the questions. Thank you, very exhaustive and very enlightening. Next, Mr. Ado Paglinawan, Vice President for Internal Affairs, Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies Institute, for his opening statement on the Taiwan and ICC issue for the Philippines. We request short lang, sana kung pwede, para we have more discussions and questions. Thank you.
The close shave we have just experienced in Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan should make the Filipino wonder where the United States is getting all its umpa that in spite of its withdrawal from Afghanistan, 2 recessions, spelling out a depression and an impending defeat in its proxy war in Ukraine, it is still insisting on pivoting to the Asia Pacific. In 1899, Americans were sharply divided over whether to annex the Philippines. Few believed that the Philippines offered a crucial commercial advantage to the United States, but many saw them as a crucial way station to Asia. Quote, had we no interests in China, unquote, noted one advocate of the annexation, the possession of the Philippines would be meaningless. That is the manifest destiny that President William McKinley used to defend U.S. expansionism. But entering the 18th century today, that destiny will never happen in treachery. It was not, as Andres Bonifacio thought, that we lost our first opportunity at independence in Intramuros. It was in the Paris peace negotiations. The Americans exchanged our friendship for 20 pieces of silver, so to speak, when they literally purchased us from Spain and have been pulling wool over our eyes since then. The United States, just as its European beginnings, has a longer view. Perhaps only a civilization that spans almost 2,000 years enables the Chinese to think further, wider, and deeper. America's problems today is that the second millennium is over, and China is no longer the weak, fragmented nation that it was when McKinley was flexing his muscles. Today, Xi Jinping has just dealt a catastrophic blow to that same expansionism when he literally isolated Taiwan from intruders by showing how the strike force of the US 6th and 7th fleets has reached obsolescence in warfare doctrine and can easily be neutralized. In the very war games scenario, not by the Chinese, but by the American think tank Center for New American Security. Any military attack by the United States or any of its allies will mean the total devastation of Japan, Guam, and maybe Hawaii, and the Philippines. Moreover, the US has no match for the quality of China's Dongfeng missile technology that can send not only intercontinental ballistic missiles, but multiple independent re-entry vehicles all over the American mainland and beyond. What is curious is that a few days after the Pelosi fiasco, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken quickened to Manila. This is ominous because while virtually sending a white flag to China on Taiwan, the US moves forward for the next round of provocations, this time to use the Philippines. This is not as innocent as it looks. The stick has been delivered in advance. Remember that before the change of government from Duterte to Marcos Jr., a threat of sanctions by the US was conveyed by Ambassador David Romualdez. Should the Philippines continue to buy 16 Russian military transport helicopters? Former Philippine Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzano said 12.7 billion pesos deal to acquire the Mi-17 helicopters have been canceled despite a 2 billion down payment. So now comes, after that stick, Blinken the carrot arrives. The question, and I ask this emphatically with the media's presence, will President Bongbong Marcos replace Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen as the American poster boy in East Asia? Our president will definitely confirm that if he visits the United States next month, even if it were polished, as coinciding with a visit to the United Nations, would be an initiation of Bongbong into the perilous world of hegemony. Meanwhile, I do not agree to joint patrols with the U.S. Coast Guard in the South China Sea and suggestions of an expanded pact. What I wish to pursue is Bongbong's statement that our ties with the Americans must evolve. But I wish to add, evolve onto abrogation. All this talk about Philippines having an independent foreign policy is a farce and a lot of horse talking. With the Mutual Defense Treaty, the Visiting Forces Agreement, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, and the 2016 ruling of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, our dice is loaded in favor of the United States and in the disfavor of our genuine national interests. They are swords hanging over our head and the heads of our national security. They are magnets for China's Dongfeng missile. A few days before his inauguration, as Kyle Mentong mentioned, Bongbong declared China as our strongest partner. Now the president is he engaging in double speak? What I'm saying is beyond words, our actions mean what we say. Clearly, concisely, as Duterte would deliver it. There is no need for a balancing act, but always virtue. Although if he needs one, then signed way before the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951, Sultan Paduka Pahala signed the Treaty of Independent Tributary States with Emperor Yongle in 1405. That effectively placed us under the protectorate of China. An independent foreign policy must be based on principles. We cannot face up with each other's nation if our dice has been loaded by sheer military alliances. Mr. President, past a crisis solved by China by winning an American war in Taiwan without fighting, according to Sun Tzu. You are instead allowing the fox to enter our chicken coop. Man up to the US, as your predecessor Duterte did, and do what is only best for your people's interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ado Paglinaw, very passionate opening statement. Next, but not the least, Professor Ana Malindog-Uy for her opening statement. She's also Vice President of the Asian Century Strategic Studies Institute.
Okay, thank you so much, Wilson, for that generous introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. To our media friends, thank you so much for coming, and to our friends in the Zoom, because we have a hybrid media forum. Thank you very much as well for attending and joining us in this media forum. I have a very short opening statement, so let me read it. Okay, the rising tensions between the US and China due to the US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, despite China's expressed opposition, is a provocation vis-a-vis China in the strongest sense. The visit of Pelosi to Taiwan has challenged the bottom line and the red line of China while undermining China's sovereign and territorial integrity over Taiwan, a renegade province of China. This is a reckless move on the part of Pelosi that has changed the trajectory and the atmosphere of the Taiwan Strait. Being the third highest public official of the United States, who recently visited Taiwan despite strong opposition from the People's Republic of China and the Chinese people, only signals the further weakening and deterioration of US-China relations. The visit of Pelosi is a serious violation of the One China principle and the provision of the three China-US joint communiques. Accordingly, the visit of Pelosi has a severe impact on the foundation of China-US relations and seriously undermines China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It gravely undermines peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait and sends a serious wrong signal to the separatist forces in Taiwan. The One China policy, we have to remember, clearly states that there is only one sovereign state under the name China, with the People's Republic of China serving as the sole legitimate government of that China, and Taiwan is a part of China. This is one of the basic norms of governing international relations after the Second World War, and one of the bedrocks, I think, of international law. The One China principle is recognized by 181 countries, including the United States, while Taiwan's so-called quest for independence is recognized by less than 24 countries across the globe. The PRC has been recognized by the United Nations and across the world as the sole legal government representing the entire Chinese people. This is, I think, the glaring fact that Pelosi and, well, her company disregarded and disrespected when she landed in Taiwan last Tuesday night. Again, this is definitely signals the further deterioration of China-US relations. To add, the problem with the United States is that they say one thing and do another thing. They have this deliberate practice of what you call strategic ambiguity, also known as a policy of strategic uncertainty, of being intentionally ambiguous on certain aspects of US foreign policy that suit their geostrategic and hegemonic interests at the expense of another country or at the expense of the world. In short, US foreign policy toward the Taiwan issue vis-a-vis China or vis-a-vis the One China principle is akin to a two-faced foreign policy loaded with double standards. Indeed, the recent visit of Pelosi to Taiwan has no doubt put the Taiwan Strait in a new round of tensions and severe challenges. Such an irresponsible move on the part of Pelosi, the Taiwan authorities, and even the US government deserves condemnation, for it puts the whole world on the brink of another world war. On the part of the Philippines, it is a positive note that as a country, we adhere to the One China principle, which is one of the foundation of our bilateral relation with China. On another note, if we talk about, if we have real talk, it dictates that Taiwan is just a pawn of the US in its chess match with China. Thus, the Philippines must not get involved and should not allow the country to be another pawn or proxy of the US. I think that's the crux of the matter, and the most important thing that the current administration has to think about and figure out, given the obsolete and lopsided 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement or EDCA, and the Visiting Forces Agreement or BFA. Abrogating, revisiting, or renegotiating the MDT, EDCA, and the BFA is like a liberation for the Philippines from the indirect control and its subvergence or submissive, or the state of being submissive to the US, especially in military terms or aspects. More importantly, maintaining the BFA, EDCA, or even the MDT in its original text is an antithesis in the pursuit of a genuine independent foreign policy and non-aligned stance of the country. The Philippines must pursue an independent foreign policy that upholds and prioritizes its national interests and not those of other countries. In any case, China decides to hasten the reunification of Taiwan to the mainland or motherland. This process is an internal affair of China, and countries like the Philippines should not get involved. If we do otherwise, it would mean we're interfering in China's sovereign internal affairs, and it will generate a backlash on our relation with China. These kinds of scenarios are for the current administration under PBBM to ponder on, given that the US has made a lot of promises to Taiwan that it will come to its aid in any eventuality in the Taiwan Strait. And surely the Philippines will be pressured by the US to take a side because of this MDT. I hope such scenario will never happen, but the situation on the ground tells a different story. But there's always hope when leaders exercise prudence and are responsible. As a country, the Philippines needs a genuine and authentic independent foreign policy in every sense, and that would mean complete neutrality and positioning itself as non-aligned. In doing so, time is of the essence. The Philippines has no enemies and should not create one at all costs. Thus, no need to choose a side. Our relation with each country should be based on our national interests and should be based on what's good for the country and not for the benefit of other countries at our expense. The Philippines is a friend of China and the US. US enemies or adversaries are not the country's enemies or adversaries, and this must be emphasized by the current administration under the leadership of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. As a country, we should uphold our national interests and and be dragged into any conflict not our own making is, I guess, not part of our national interest. On the issue of joining or rejoining the ICC, I think I agree with PBBM's position that as a country, we should not be rejoining the ICC. We're not anymore part of the ICC. And thus far, if the ICC would pursue a preliminary or proof or investigation, it is akin to middling and snoping on the Philippine sovereignty. Also, under the Rome Statute, there's such a term as complementarity principle, which is a cornerstone of the Rome Statute legal system. This principle denotes that national jurisdictions have the primary responsibility to investigate and prosecute those responsible for international crimes. This means that the ICC can only investigate crimes against humanity if local courts are unable or unwilling to do so. But that's not the case in the Philippines. Way far from that. To note, the Philippines during the time of Duterte administration to date, until now, has no state-sanctioned killings, and the country's independent courts could prosecute alleged violation by police and law enforcement agency in the conduct of anti-illegal drugs operation at any given time. Hence, the Philippines has a functioning and vibrant justice system with independent courts able and willing to prosecute and conduct criminal proceedings before our local courts. Most importantly, the Philippines, or we as a country, we are not a failed state, and there's no need for an entity like the ICC to do criminal proceedings and investigations on our behalf. That's a big no-no. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of my opening statement. Thank you very much, and we'll hope to answer your questions to the best of our abilities. Thank you so much to everyone who's attending this media forum. Thank you, and good morning.
Thank you very much, Professor Ana Malindopoy, and to the other two analysts for your opening statements. Before the media, there's a question here from Iloilo City. We are being watched via Zoom and also by FB live stream, FB Live. This is by Dr. and also Attorney Leomil Aportadena, professor of in University of San Agustin in Iloilo City is watching us. Sabi ni Dr. Leomil Aportadena, he agrees with the three analysts here at Pandesal Forum. Sabi niya, stay the course, the Philippines should not be dragged into any conflict which is not of our own making, but also not to our national interest. And then there's another question from another people watching. The Ukraine war is raging in Europe now and destabilizing the whole world economy now. Can the world and Asia afford another Ukraine in Asia? Is this like similar to the Ukraine scenario? Because the NATO and US encouraging this country, Ukraine, to stand up to its neighbor and quarrel with Russia instead of cooperating. Do you see Taiwan, beside China and the Philippines, becoming a possible Ukraine if not handled well? Can this become a danger to Asia and the world? Is this happening possible?
Well, I think that yun ang plano. That was the plan of the Americans to create a Taiwan-Ukraine scenario. Because there are reasons why the US wants chaos now. Their economy is on the verge of a Great Depression, greater than 1929. It is very obvious because they're trying to catch up militarily with both Russia and China, particularly in the hypersonic missile technology. They're at least 2 years behind. To divert also from domestic issues for Biden, with the midterm elections and imminent loss of the Democrats to the Republicans, this is a good distraction if they create another center of chaos with Taiwan. But I think China showed that this cannot be done anymore. I think the domestic Taiwan audience realizes too, and that is no longer possible. I think that the fallback of the United States to create a scenario like that is the Philippines. That's why Lincoln has been proposing this joint patrol of the Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard with Philippine Coast Guard in the South China Sea. That is another step towards creating a conflict in Asia. And I think the Philippines should be very aware of this and should be very alert to this and to be unequivocal in its rejection of this. So far, we don't have an unequivocal rejection of these outrageous, provocative proposals of the United States. So I hope we don't make that mistake.
To Ado or Anna, what are your reactions? Is there a danger of a Ukraine situation in Asia with the Taiwan problem? And what should the Philippines do to prevent us being dragged into war next door?
Let us establish the facts. Ukraine is not part of Russia. It is a separate sovereign state. The dynamics in Russia's entering Ukraine is with regard to the action of two of its regions, namely Donetsk and Luhansk, in the expanded Donbas region, to seek independence. And Russia goes into assist these two regions because they were being, since 2014, being bombarded, and about 12,000 to 13,000 people in Donetsk and Luhansk have already been killed. So the dynamics is different. In the case of China, Taiwan is a province. This is not debatable. I don't know why some opinion writers debate this. This has been defined by the United Nations in 1971, that one China policy. And so what will happen here is I don't think the Taiwanese will raise arms against whatever mainland China will do. So this will drag directly the United States into entering the picture because it does not have a proxy. In the Ukrainian war, the proxy is Ukraine. Zelensky is their puppet. Here, Tsai Ing-wen is their puppet, but she has no full control of his country. In fact, do you know that for a very long time already nobody is applying anymore to join the Air Force of Taiwan? The Taiwanese people do not want war with mainland China. Only the DPP, the party of Tsai Ing-wen. So, if Taiwan does not enter, walang proxy. Ang papasok, US. Ha? And by virtue of EDCA, ito, maganda rito. We have allowed, or was it Benito Silvio Aquino who allowed?
Yeah.
The enhanced defense cooperation agency, where 8 of our Philippine bases could be held. Local bases can be used by the Americans also. They can establish their own bases, but they can base in our base. And they're not observing protocols like no entry of nuclear. Maniniwala ba kayo na pumapasok yung mga aircraft carrier na yan at saka yung mga barko ng Amerika dito na walang dalang nuclear weapons? O yung mga aeroplano na pupunta rito na walang bitbit ng mga nuclear warheads? And nobody's checking about it. Since time immemorial, walang pumapasok dito sa sa East Asia. Lalo na sa China. Na dinuduro-duro ang China. But now China has proven itself to be capable of making not only a counterattack, because their doctrine is active defense. We will not attack unless we are attacked. We will definitely counterattack if we are attacked. Yan ang sitwasyon dito. So I do not anticipate another Ukraine here. Ito nga sinasabi ko sa opening statement ko. But, baka gusto ni Bongbong Marcos. Yan ang bantayan natin. No? Because I'm speaking here for the Filipino people. I'm not speaking here for any government official. Let the policies of this administration be crystal clear as they were crystal clear during the previous administration. And that is, walang magmamando dito, walang magbubuli dito. Kaya Pilipino, Amerikano, o Chino. Yun ang policy ni Duterte. So, we don't have to debate on this one China policy. It is already a UN resolution supported by
UN resolution.
100 out of 193 members, 100 only 14 are not supporting it. See? So wala lang yung debate dyan, tapos na yung debate dyan. The debate is only in the principle of the Americans, in the rule-based, yung kanilang unilateral strategic ambiguity.
Thank you. Alam mo, sorry to interrupt you. May nag-text dito, Attorney Tiboy Reyes, agreeing with what you just said. Ngayon lang, sabi ni Attorney Tiboy Reyes, nasa Facebook Live siya. Sabi niya, there's a new article in Taipei Times in Taiwan. Sabi niya, 84.9% of the Taiwanese said they support maintaining status quo between Taiwan and China, while only 6.8% want Taiwan to declare independence, and only 1.6%. So sabi nito ni Attorney Tiboy Reyes, watching sa FB Live, only the US actually wants Taiwan independence. The Taiwanese people are practical, they don't want it now. And somebody else texted before we go to Ana, sabi ng isang tao, tama sinabi niyo, we should not forget now Taiwan is a province of China, similar to Sulu Sultanate now, and a province of the Philippines, no longer a sultanate. Ms. Ana Marinduque, what is your reaction? And also, pahabol ni Attorney Dr. Portadera, he agrees with the two of you, we should prevent another Ukraine in Asia beside the Philippines. Kasi it's not good for the Philippines and Asia now. Thank you, Attorney Leomil Portadera in Iloilo City na watching. Ms. Ana, short answer also to the Ukraine possibility, danger.
Okay, sa amin kasi ganito ang tingin ko, no? The word invasion, I think, is not the right word. If in any case, China will really reunify Taiwan to its motherland or to the mainland. Because as what the One China principle dictates, it is a province of China. So it's not an invasion in that sense, no? Because it is part of China. And unlike Ukraine, as what Adel said, Ukraine is an independent sovereign state. So ang nangyari doon, ng military operation ng Russia, it's really an invasion to some extent, but even Russia does not call it invasion. Kasi hindi naman nila talaga ino-occupy, but they call it military operation. So it really depends on the terminology and operationalization of terms, no? But on the side of Taiwan, it's not. It is reunification. It's just, ang tanong lang dyan is, peaceful ba ang proseso or magiging medyo madugo? Yun yung hindi natin alam. But I think China, as much as possible, based on my studies, no, and readings, it really wants a peaceful reunification of Taiwan to the mainland. So, but they don't rule out the option of, you know, exercising force if necessary. It really depends on the external forces like the United States meddling in the internal affairs of China. Okay, so yun yung konteksto talaga.
Now, ang tanong naman dun sa part na, if in any case, pag nagkaroon ng eventuality or sabihin na natin military confrontation in the Taiwan Strait, and also US being involved, kasi may mga promeso siya sa, sa Taiwan, ang tanong, ano yung impact nito sa mundo? Of course, it will lead, the world will bleed, okay? If you look at Ukraine crisis, it's already affecting the whole world. Tignan mo ang presyo ng gasolina, lahat, no? Lahat, everything is really affected. The economy of many countries are bleeding. So if you add another gulo in the Taiwan Strait, what will happen to us? Actually, isa sa mga impact na apektado dyan is the Philippines.
Sorry, we have foreign
okay, sorry.
from Taiwan, from Hong Kong.
Sorry.
Sorry, English.
Okay, I'm catering to the Filipino public.
We have international journalists watching.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry for that. So, in terms of any eventuality in the Taiwan Strait will cause a lot of problems for the whole world, especially economically, no? Like, for example, if China will be engaged and Taiwan will be engaged, supply chains will be disrupted. And China is the economic powerhouse of the world at the moment. So everything is affected. So we don't want that to happen. So that's why we're saying that countries in the world should abide and respect the so-called One China policy. And the US should stop mingling in the internal affairs of other countries so that peace can be achievable. No, that's my point on the whole of this question about the Taiwan issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for your incisive points. Mr. Laurel has a short addition before we go to the any other questions.
I would just like to today that China is in no hurry to reintegrate Taiwan with the mainland government. No hurry. They have all the time. China has been there for 5,000 years. What is another 10 years, 20 years? I think the goal of China is 2049 to have the entire nation together. And as I wrote in my paper, the peaceful reunification of Taiwan with the mainland, with the motherland, is inevitable. With 40% in general, but sometimes I think it is now reached 47% of Taiwan exports going to China. Sinong tututol sa unification eventually? Kung ganyang kalaki ang tulong ng China sa ekonomiya ng Taiwan. I'm sorry. I should say
In English.
speaking in English.
Yes, we have foreign media, and in fact, the next question is from the foreign media. Taiwan.
Yes. So I wholeheartedly agree with the text from one of your audience.
Yes.
That the survey shows 70% at least of Taiwanese
Attorney Tibarday.
rejects the idea of independence. They want the status quo because they don't want to hurry things up. I think Taiwanese in general know they will be reintegrated with mainland China. It is the United States that keep pushing with the DPP, Democratic Progressive People's Party. That's all. It is the US that is desperate to create trouble in Asia. That's all. It's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. They appreciate what you're saying. We have a question from Taiwan. That's why you have to speak in English. If you want to speak in Philippine or Tagalog, just a few lines, but it should mainly be in English. Yes, I will translate for you. Angie Chen from Central News Agency of Taiwan. Her question is similar to the question of Wesley Chua of Chinese Commercial News. I will read the two journalist question. The question of Ms. Angie Chen from Taiwan is, President Bongbong Marcos is planning to meet US President Biden in New York and Washington next month in September. Does this mean the Philippines is moving closer to USA compared to China? Similar question by Mr. Wesley Chua of Chinese Commercial News. His question is, do you think President Bongbong Marcos' recent pronouncements regarding Taiwan issue will affect our railway project renegotiation with China? And a question of Wesley Chua is, how do you see that Bongbong Marcos, President Marcos, chose to visit USA first rather than China? your reactions. Can we start with Ana naman, ladies first? Is this no, or is this wise strategic move to confuse the analysts? or is this...
Actually, the question is quite sensitive, no, for me
Yes,
to
yes,
respond. No,
yes.
but this is my take on this, no. I think as of now, I don't want to make comments on that, no, because I think if in any case PBBM would be going to the United States to attend a UN assembly or a UN gathering in there, and on the sideline he will meet probably President Joe Biden.
So UN is the priority. It's not because of the US.
On the sideline, according to reports on the sideline. But
Yes.
I think what is important is to wait and see what will be the outcome if in any case the two presidents will meet and discuss things. I think that's the most important. So I don't wanna preempt anything, but on another note, for the Chinese people, I think it's a little bit hurting because it's actually Foreign Minister Wang Yi who went here and personally gave the personal invitation of President Xi Jinping to PBBM to visit China. So, but I am not sure what's the status of that at the moment. So, it's a very sensitive issue for me, and I don't want to comment at this time until I know what would be the outcome of that possible visit in the US and possible meeting with President Joe Biden, no? Kasi it's hard, no? I don't want to make any suggestion or comments on this at the moment, yes.
Thank you, Ana. Mr. Ado, pag ginawa naman, your comments. Short lang kasi we have many questions.
On the other hand, I would like to preempt and comment on it.
Go.
Why? Because diplomacy is 99% optics. I was a former diplomat, and I know this. And I know that the Blinken visit here precisely is to make sure that Marcos Jr. visits the US before any other country. Preemption na yan eh. Kaya ako, I've always been against appointment of relatives by the president to be the ambassador to the United States. Ang lakas ng labi ng kanyang pinsan pa niya, Tio.
Second cousin, I think.
Second cousin.
I think, second cousin. I think.
Ang lakas! Dito pa lang sa Russian helicopter.
English.
It's strong lobby by the second cousin of the president, James Romualdez. No? So that this happens. And that's why I'm saying that I've always been against nepotism by the president, especially sensitive positions like ambassador to the US or Department of Foreign Affairs or whatever.
Thank you, Ado. Mr. Herman naman, kasi we have
Because
so many...
what I would like to make is a consistent Bongbong Marcos when he said that China is our strongest partner, therefore you can visit the US after you visit China. Unahin mo muna yung best friend natin.
English.
Big priority for our best friend before this treacherous partner of ours who does only its own, pursues only its best interest.
Thank you, Ado. Next, Mr. Herman Laurel. Sorry, we have many questions. In the short answer, please.
In the internet age where everybody of the 7.5 billion individual persons in the world can watch what's going on. Diplomacy is psychology perception. That's the first point which coincides with Ado's view na it's optics. But the optics, of course, has its limits. And that's why I describe PBBM as a sphinx-like. Parang yung statue sa Egypt na hindi mo mabasa, Sphinx-like.
You're very
good. diplomatic. The president, BBM now, is taking that position because of number one, is very new to the position, the responsibility of the presidency. Number two, he has made very unequivocal his friendship with China, his nation's friendship with China. Number three, I think he is forestalling, given the crisis the Philippines and the world, economic crisis the Philippines and the world is in right now. He is forestalling any negative and aggressive initiatives from the United States against his country and stalling for time. So I hope for the best from President BBM. And that is why I'm appealing for our Department of Foreign Affairs who advises the President to base our foreign policy and relations on virtue, not just a general statement of kaibigan na or friends to all, but friends to the virtuous friends.
Just quickly,
Thank you.
Wilson,
Yes,
just to add,
Anna.
okay, I told everyone earlier that I don't want to make comments, I don't want to preempt things, but there are two things that I think I would expect from the president, the current president, is to think very carefully about the so-called expanded defense pact with the United States. And the second one is the so-called possibility of patrolling the South China Sea/WPS with the United States. I mean, joint patrol, of our military and the US military. I think they really need to think through all of these things and possibly reflect on what will be the consequences of these things and how it will impact the country and how it will impact the so-called Philippines-China relations. I think these are important issues.
Yes. One sentence.
Yes.
Now, we already saw this in the Russian deal for the helicopters. And we might lose 2 billion pesos if we cancel that deal. And why is it happening? Who is lobbying against the Russian deal? So these are questions that ought to be carefully manicured by President Bongbong Marcos, because these are different times. The dynamics are different. We are no longer in the colonial era, okay? And I hope that he will learn a lot, and he has learned a lot from his father when dealing with the Americans. I'm wondering, however, if the Americans will still allow him to come home if he goes to the US. He has a contempt charge in the Hawaiian court. Remember that. And if the Americans can kidnap Noriega from Panama and incarcerate him in Guantanamo, they might bring the Bongbong Marcos back to Honolulu and exile him there. Is he crazy? Is he willing to take the chance?
Thank you very much, Adol. But I personally think the UN as a main reason to allow will be safe. Siguro kasi yung kalaban ng USA, Iran president went to New York.
That is still New York. That is still New York.
No, it's not New York.
That's still US territory.
Thank you. There's a follow-up question from Ms. Angie Chen of Central News Agency of Taiwan. The question is in my phone. It's about overseas Filipino workers in Taiwan. She said, and I think I read it almost 200,000 to 200,000 OFWs in Taiwan. Ms. Angie Chen said, her question is to you. It is reported by the Manila Economic Cultural Office, the Philippine office in Taipei. They are discussing already with Filipinos in Taiwan for possible evacuation plan if the situation in Taiwan escalates. What do the panelists think of this? What should the Philippine government do now to prepare for the worst scenario? I think worst scenario, Ms. Angie Chen of Taiwan, means war in Taiwan or over Taiwan. how would this possible war affect the Philippines if ever they make the mistake like the US escalates the situation there, and then they clash with China over Taiwan? What should the Philippines do, and how will the Philippines be affected? Please short answer lang because they have many other questions. Many other questions. Short time.
Okay.
All the answers provided.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think yes. I think the Filipinos back in Taiwan should try to discuss evacuation plans and all these things. It's just a discussion, and I think it's planning. Planning is always important for any eventuality. So I think that's a positive steps, no? But of course, we don't know. I think the military exercises of the Chinese, of the PLA has stopped already around Taiwan, but they will continue military exercises on the other side, in the Yellow River, which is a little close to Taiwan and a little close to the Korean Peninsula. So, but still for 15 days. So, we need to plan as a country what we're going to do to evacuate our 150 to 200,000 Filipinos back there. If in any case, it's just planned. We don't know what will happen, but we need to be vigilant. And another thing, I think, when you talk about the Philippines, again, I have said in my opening statement, the Philippines should not get involved. If China will hasten it's the reunification of Thailand to the mainland is an internal affairs of China, precisely because Taiwan is a province of China, is a renegade province of China, and based on the one China principle. But the Philippines has to rethink and really to think, what will happen to us if in any case the US get involved? Because we have the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, we have 5 EDCA bases in the Philippines, where it is located in our military bases. So even the president cannot have or don't have the right to check this EDCA bases of the Americans, So we need to think very carefully. If it's, what if the Philippines get dragged into that, So I think these are the things that the current administration has to think as early as now and prepare for any kind of contingency measure. Or if there's a need for revisiting this MDT and BFA, then so be it. Do it now, as early as now.
Interesting. My follow-up question, John, Ms. Anna.
Yes.
You just said now and earlier, Mr. Rigoberto Piclao, in his column today, Manila Times said that President Bongbong Marcos should now rescind the EDCA treaty of former President Noynoy Aquino.
Yes, I've read the article.
Because of what you said. I'd like to ask the three of you your short answer to your opinion. Should the government of the Philippines rescind this? Kasi Nery Colmenares, the former congressman, when he was here a few months ago, he said when he went to Vietnam and museum, he saw an exhibit there saying the Americans bombed Vietnam from the Clark Airfield planes sent from the Philippines to Vietnam at that time. At that time, Vietnam could not retaliate because of missiles and everything. If the US uses the 5 EDCA bases to have war with China over Taiwan, would that not endanger us?
Yes, I've written,
yun ang tanong ni Mr. Piclao.
I've written a lot of articles on this, and I've said in my articles, and I would stand by it, that China will not attack the Philippines because we're a friend of China. That's established, But if in any case the Philippines will be used as a launch pad to attack China in any eventuality in the Taiwan Strait, in the Taiwan Strait, Taiwan for that matter, then we will be dragged into the conflict. And of course, China will retaliate. At saan ba ang retaliation ng China? Doon ba sa other side of the Pacific? Of course, China will retaliate tayo ang tatamahan. We will be the subject of that retaliation. So that's why we're saying, tama si Ambassador Bobby Piclao. We need to resend that EDCA the soonest possible time. It is just an executive agreement. So the president actually has the power to do it. Now, they need to think about these things and probably reflect on these things as early as now, when there is still time. Yes, of course, China is not anymore the China of 100 years or 50 years.
It is already a powerful country, militarily speaking even, and it's an economic powerhouse. Even military, even in terms of economic, it can flex its muscle. No? So let's be more, I think the country has to think about these things. And being neutral is already a requirement for us. It's not as if like it's just a thing, no? It's already a requirement for us to maintain stability as well in our own territorial boundary whatsoever. So that's my stand.
I'd just like to add that neutrality is not an act to prevent war. I think the Philippines should be anti-war.
So neutrality is for peace, actually, what you're saying.
Neutrality is just not having a position between what is right and what is wrong. I think for the Philippines to protect itself, it has to do what is right, which is to discourage the forces that are pushing war in our region and in the rest of the world, which is to say that we have to advise the United States of America that their decades of hegemony is over, and we do not want that. We must take a virtuous position and keep repeating that. Number two, the preparations for evacuation and whatever of 200,000 Filipinos in Taiwan is, I think, always necessary but not essential at this time. Because I think the chances of war is 0.00601%, given that the United States has announced, Anthony Blinken, U.S. State Secretary, is calling for de-escalation. Actually, umaatras ng Estados Unidos. The United States is backing down. Internal criticism of Pelosi is overwhelming. Any support for Pelosi for the stunt that she did. What I think the Philippines should be planning, the DFA, President BBM, and the Department of Defense should be planning is how to encourage the United States to step back continuously and accept the multipolar world. Tanggapin na ng Estados Unidos. The United States should accept that it is just one of the powers and its aspiration or its hope to restore its hegemony over Asia is over. Tapos na ang Estados Unidos. Any excessive pressure of the Americans to bring back their power here is the thing that will lead to war and to their defeat, undoubtedly to their defeat.
Thank you. There's a short comment here from one of the people watching via Zoom or via Facebook Live, Ateneo de Manila University Professor Dr. Joby Miroy. Comment niya for the three analysts here. It seems the Philippines is in a sweet spot of being wooed by two superpowers. Actually, third, may Russia pa. We should play our cards right and decide rationally and not use emotions to decide emotionally. So even Professor Joby Miroy, educated in Europe, sabi niya, we should be rational.
I agree with him.
Yes.
I agree with him.
And Professor from Iloilo, Yomil Aportadera, also added to the question of Taiwan journalist Angie, one of the pillars of our foreign policy in the Philippines is the welfare of our OFWs who are in every part of government. We don't want destabilization in our region, not in Taiwan. There's another one, Jake Ortiz of DWAD, I think radio station. If ever President Bongbong Marcos will abrogate BFA and EDCA, in your analysis, will the Americans try to sanction us? Question of Jake Ortiz of DWAD.
Well, all the U.S. sanctions have not worked. They sanctioned Russia. Russia's economy is zooming right now.
High oil prices making the picture down.
They sanctioned Iran for the past maybe 7-8 years. And Iran continues to thrive and expanding its alliance with Russia, China, and other countries. U.S. sanctions do not work. Let us not be afraid of that.
Thank you to, yes, Mr. Adon.
Well, I agree. Your sanctions don't work, but it casts fear. It's the fear factor. Sa mga nations na ina-address niya. Pero walang long-term effects. So, well, in fact, presyo ng gasolina ngayon, mababa na, di ba? Now, should we evacuate our people?
OFWs, yes.
OFWs and all that? No immediate reason for that. I think Taiwan is the safest place right now. Why? Of course, pagdating nung economic sanction, maghihirap ang buhay doon. But that may not justify an evacuation.
Yes.
What would justify evacuation is most probably violence. No? I don't know if media has seen this illustration. This is an illustration done by the Center for New American Security, the think tank that is supported by Anthony Blinken. Kumikita siya dito. No? Simulating 3 attacks on China mainland. Why? Because China, as I said earlier, will not attack unless they are attacked. And will definitely counterattack if they are attacked. So there are 3 blue attacks on mainland China here simulated by CNAS. War Games participants drew out an immediate 11 possible Chinese retaliation. Immediate ito, in red. The U.S. attacks will most probably come from U.S. surface warships, submarines, or U.S. aircraft. China does not, repeat, China does not have to launch a single Navy or Air Force equipment to do its job. Its powerhouse will be delivered by China's Dongfeng missile technology launched from the Chinese mainland, which is very difficult to detect because they are kept in tunnels in the mountains, and they are only thrown out when they are supposed to be launched. One of these potential missiles could tip with nuclear warhead intended for Hawaii. Ayun. Sinabi ito ng CNAS, no?
Thank you, Ado.
Ang one last line here is, it is Japan that must be worried if anything happens, because there are 7 out of 11 missiles that the Americans in our games have designated for Japan, eliminating the biggest military base of the U.S. in Asia Pacific, which is located in Cadena Island.
Thank you very much.
One in the Philippines.
Yes.
Oh, by the way, I mentioned the aircrafts. They are projecting aircrafts doing bombing from Basa Air Base in northern Luzon. So the retaliation against the Philippines is there.
Wow. Do we get rental out of these private places?
We're paying for water and electricity of the Americans.
Ay, wow. Sorry, ito pahabol before the other questions. From Professor Yomil Portadela of Iloilo. Sabi niya, please correct me if I'm correct. The government in Taiwan also claims to represent the whole Chinese people, because the government in Taiwan, it calls itself officially Republic of China or ROC. It continues to elect deputies or legislators representing districts in mainland China. This is the main basis of the People's Republic of China's objection over insinuations or recognition of Taiwan as independent. From Professor Yomil Portadela, who's a medical doctor and an attorney also.
Well, as I said, that debate is already finished.
Thank you.
Only rogue countries would pursue that line.
Thank you. Additional question from Taiwan.
By the way, dito sa here in the map that I showed you, not a single red missile coming from China is intended for Taiwan. So Taiwan is a safe place. Japan is not. the Japanese should be thinking very carefully that before the US annihilates any American force operating in the area, Japan will be first to go down.
Thank you very much. We have time to summarize your points. Do we have any last questions from the media here on the floor, just in case anyone wants to ask one or two more last questions? Yung pandesal ni Clarissa napatay. So maybe one more last question for everyone here. Again, what do you want the government of the Philippines to do regarding the Taiwan problem? Aside from not being a pawn, sabi nga ni Ms. Ana, and not being part of the rivalry, can the Philippines be a peacemaker and ask US and China to shake hands instead of quarreling over petty issues? Can the Philippines, can Bongbong Marcos go to the US and tell the US politicians, please stop quarreling? Can we do that? Can the Philippines, instead of being a pawn, be a peacemaker? That's my personal question. Sorry. Can we not change our role? Being a pawn, being a puppet, now so-called, can we be a peacemaker? Tell the US and China, be friends so the world economy can grow instead of go down?
That is my message, to be a virtuous participant in geopolitics. To be virtuous means to take the right side, the good side, the productive side, and that side is the side of peace. And to shun, to advise against the side that creates the wars. I think that speaks for itself now, and it's up to PBBM to make it a reality.
Yes. Can we, yeah, Ms. Ana Malindong Puri.
Okay, for me, it's like this, no? Actually, PBBM had the chance to be a peacemaker. But I was I'll be very frank, a little bit disappointed. Kasi ang sinabi, what he said captured by the different reports from different media is like this. He said, to be perfectly candid, I did not think it raised the intensity. It did not raise the intensity, it just demonstrated how the intensity of the conflict has been. It actually has been at the level for a good while. But we got used to it and put it aside. That's his statement when he met with Biden. For me, Blinken. But for me, he could have said, he should have reminded Blinken that peace and stability in the region is primordial, and the Philippines adheres to one China principle, and that the Philippines is for peace, not war. I think it should have been the message to Blinken, no? To reassert that, we want peace in the region. We don't want anything that happens to disrupt the peace and stability of the region. And he should have said to Blinken that, please, America, let's be all responsible players in the Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific region. So that's my reaction, actually, to that statement reported in different media. But of course, I trust the president that he knows what he's doing. I trust him that he has good people around him who can give him advice what is good not only for the country but for the region.
Thank you. And there's a comment here or question from one of our audience on FB Live. Sabi ni Miel, Pelosi's visit to Taiwan was clearly a provocation. But it is not only Taiwan that the US is considering to use as another Ukraine. Given that the US has trained our AFP, educated AFP commanders that have facilities within our bases courtesy of EFCA, many politicians don't question US foreign policies here. The Philippines could be the next Ukraine. We should campaign against US possible use of the Philippines for any war. We should not applaud the escalation of US-China tension. Yes. From Miel, pakita lang anong full name ni Miel, Ms. Larissa. Watching by FB Live. And many other questions here. We don't have time, we could siguro request all our analysts and to please summarize all your good advocacies and analysis in your closing statement. We begin with Mr. Herman Laurel on my right. Can you please summarize all your points about
Very short.
Taiwan and ICC also about freedom?
First of all, this is not new. This struggle to control the Taiwan Strait in order to control the underbelly of China and contain China and contain the rise of Asia has been going on for at least 200 years. And it's going on today. But the action of China now shows its development and its commitment to ending this age of neo-colonialism and imperialism of the West. I do not include only the US. Actions of the European Union under NATO are also part of it. And Asia has to learn to work together. We have not had any real war except the Second World War, which was also provoked by the United States. So I will sum it up by saying we are in a war for forever peace, which we should push for, versus the forever war of the 500 years of Western domination.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herman Laurel of Asia Pacific Strategic Institute. Next, we'd like to request Mr. Ado Paginawan for his closing statement.
Regarding the question of whether we could advise the United States, I think this would be, the attempt should always be done, but I doubt if we will have any gravitas. From the beginning of our relationship with the United States has never been regarded us as an equal ally. This started in 1899 in my opening statement, and I quoted, "Had we no interest in China, the possession of the Philippines would be meaningless." And they have tremendous influence. That our foreign policies have been largely emasculated and sidelined by our own government people. The 30 years from 1986 to 2016 marked a remarkable, obnoxious subservience to the United States. It is all in the concept of interoperability, which does not only mean equipment. They give us equipment. It also means personnel, with increasingly large numbers of Philippines and Italian personnel trained in the United States and cloned to think like Americans. This must be put by our National Security Advisor, Clarita Carlos, into the consciousness of this government. Because we have to correct this. We have already shown the world that we can source our equipment and train our personnel with the Israelites, with the Russians, with even with the Polish, even with even with China. But they always say, no, this equipment will be, the interoperability of this equipment will not work. That's how shallow to me. What man has created, can create and improve on. That is just saying we can't do it when the opposite is true. We can always do it, especially with the modern technologies now, no longer hostage by the Western countries, but has spread to Russia, India, and even China. So let us not have this bullshit of interoperability. And advice that we give the Americans will always boomerang to us, will not be heard, and will always boomerang to us. And in turn, be used against us. The Americans are for the Americans. Period.
Before we go to Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy for her closing statement, may pahabol tayong questions from the floor. Can you mention your name and give you the microphone? Okay. On mo lang. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Susan Amoroso of SA House, and I'm also holding a forum on the Forum for Philippine Progress. And my question to the four of you, Mr. Wilson Flores, Mr.
Yes.
Herman Laurel, Mr. Ado Patinawan, who are my good friends way back, many years ago, and Miss Anna, whom I only met. What makes the Philippines the sweetheart of choice by the new superpowers in the world? China, Russia, and the US.
Good question. Can we answer briefly? Tapos, yes, Ms. Ana muna and everyone, why the Philippines now? Why the superpowers are choosing us to like quarrel over us or dragging us into their rivalries? Why?
I think it really boils down to one important thing, no? One important factor. It's basically the geopolitical situation or location of the Philippines. We have a geostrategic location, which superpowers like China or even, well, actually the United States has been there it's like the Philippines is like a US outpost in the Pacific. So it's really our geostrategic location. That's one. That's a very important factor. That's why we're like sandwiched on all of these things. So yeah, that's my answer.
Is there a law? A short answer? And everyone? Yes. Why?
Although it's possible, so
Yes.
let's say that remember these three names.
Yes.
The Philippine Strait, the Cebu Strait, and of course the islands of the Philippines. Because the two are choke points to prevent China from exiting the China Sea area into the West Pacific, to the West Pacific, and on to Hawaii, Guam, and so on. And of course, the islands of the Philippines as a staging point for missile attacks on China. So, yun pong tatlong points. The islands, the Luzon Strait, Philippine Straits at taas, and the Cebu Straits. Yun lang po.
Meron pala akong tatagdag.
Yes. Sir, hello.
My answer is when you get a map of the world from National Bookstore, there are two versions. If you get the Western version, you will not appreciate what I'm saying. But if you get the Asia Pacific version, you will, when you open it, you will see the Philippines right smack in the middle of the map. And this is where tremendous trade passes. And not only that, it's being used by superpowers to flex their muscles from the west to the east and east to the west. And insofar as America is concerned, I think the answer is we have 3 million hostages in the United States of America called Filipino Americans who have chosen to be citizens of the United States. So yun lang po, short.
Thank you. Tinanong din ako kanina, kaya short answer ako. I think geography and history. Geography, we're right in the center of the Asia Pacific region. That's why yung Gallium Trade noon, 250 years, Philippines was the middleman between China and Latin America and Europe. And number two, history, I think one reason, we are the only former American colony, I think, in the world, or at least in Asia. So we are already culturally part of them psychologically. So it's easier to convince the Philippines that they are here for our security now. But actually, they are everywhere for themselves, like all countries in the world. We should not forget, every country is out for their own national interest. Not true that they are here to be security guards for free. In 5 cases in the Philippines for free. No such thing in the world. Not even the Pope would do that, I think. Spend billions of pesos every year to be security guards for free. So yun, I think geography and history. Maybe one more question before the last closing statement of Ms. Professor Ana Malindagoy. One more question? Okay na? Yes. Closing statement from Professor Ana Malindagoy. Again, the three of them are analysts of the Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies Institute. She is Vice President for External Affairs there and a geopolitics analyst and columnist, Professor Ana Malindagoy.
Okay, thank you, Wilson, for hosting us here in Kamaning Bakery, and thank you to our media friends who attended the media forum for listening to us as well, and to the friends in Zoom. No? Thank you very much for giving your time to us. I would just reiterate my opening statement because I think this is the crux of the matter. No? Again, Yellow Whites dictate that Taiwan again is the zone of the US and its geostrategic interests. And the Philippines, whatever happens in the Taiwan Strait, as much as possible, should not get involved and should not allow the country to be a pawn or another proxy of the US. And when you talk about the military agreements with the United States, I think it's high time for the current administration. It was done actually during the Duterte administration. No, there was a genuine impetus during the time of the Duterte to review all of these military agreements that we have with the United States. But I think it was stalled. No, but in this administration, I think it's high time for us to revisit, review, and see if it's really necessary and it applies to the kind of world order that we have. We're not anymore a unipolar world. We're a multipolar world where there are hegemons or great powers in different regions. And we need to acknowledge, I think, that China in this region, in the Asia-Pacific region, is the strongest power, not only militarily, but economically, even an economic powerhouse across the globe. So that's, I think, are very important things that this current administration and even Filipinos has to think about and reflect on. And also, we need to remember as well that the adversaries or what you call enemies or whatever you call them, no, of America is not the adversaries and enemies of the United States. That has to sink in our psychology, no, as a people. And also, I think we need to pursue, and last point that I want to push forward, no, in this media forum is, I think we need to think carefully of what it really means to have an independent foreign policy. Because balancing is not really an independent foreign policy, it's just a balancing act. So I think the current administration has to reflect, it has to define what you call national interest of the Philippines. And one basic thing, no, in this national interest, being dragged into any conflict, military confrontation is not to our advantage and it's not our national interest. And also basic thing in geopolitics, no? You have to know where you are located. The Philippines is in Asia. No, we're not in America. We're in Asia. So it's imperative for the Philippines to have good relations with its neighbor. And as much as possible, not to have conflict or not to create enemies with any neighbor as much as possible. So thank you so much again. And I appreciate everyone who asked questions and everyone who made comments based on our statements and responses to the different questions. Thank you so much and have a pleasant morning to everyone.
Thank you very much again, Ana Malindagoy, Ato Magdinawan, and of course the President of Asian Century Strategic Institute, Mr. Herman Laurel, for this enlightening, thought-provoking, and very frank Pandesal Forum. We have a consensus here by the three analysts that I want to summarize lang short lang. No war in Asia, no war over Taiwan, and we should not become a pawn of any country. We could not in the world afford another Ukraine situation, even though Ukraine is not like Taiwan, sabi ni Aldo and Herman and Anna. Also, the three analysts uphold the Philippines Constitution, call for independent foreign policy. And I think the consensus of the three analysts also is, let us at least review or negotiate or rescind the EDCA that might endanger us in any war of the US against anyone in the region. And OFWs are important in Taiwan. Peace is important for Philippine economy and Asian economy. Thank you to our media friends for coming to Pandesal Forum. We have to hear a communication. We have to have a photo op with the Pandesal. Our bakers will be happy. Yes. Pwede. Our Pandesal is still the same size, the same density. Hindi hangin ito.
Si Wilson nang mahangin.
Sabi ng Bible, by the way, the
Recording
Bible
stop.
said, if people throw rocks at you, throw bread at them, Pandesal. So I suggest the US use Pandesal to throw at other people, even Taiwan and China. No military expenses. Spend more money on bread, not on weapons.
Are we standing up?
Yes, we sit muna or standing up? Okay lang to? Nakaupo or ano? Larissa, picture din?
Okay na.
Yes. Okay. Then picture, Larissa. Smile. Thank you very much to everyone, to our media friends. I hope you enjoyed coffee, brunch, and our Pandesal. Thank you.
Salamat po.
For those who are interested to get a copy of our statements in electronic version,
Yes.
you can ask Clarissa. Clarissa is
Yes.
there.
She will email.
Electronic version is with them.
Yes, the soft copy. And the recording of the entire session, we can email to anyone who wants to get a copy also.
Hindi na to.
Yes. Thank you again to everyone. At least hindi tayo na-antok dito sa Taiwan issue na to. This is the very story neighbor ng Pilipinas, Taiwan. But tumikilaok daw, if there's a chicken daw growing in the northern part of the Philippines, in the tip of Taiwan, they could hear it down. So let us pray for peace in the Taiwan states. And no more war even in Ukraine. Thank you very much. We are supposed to have a Pandesal Forum tomorrow, 10 o'clock, but we are trying to reschedule it Wednesday. 10 a.m. also. Wednesday we have a very
I received it.
there's a veteran journalist.
Let me know when.
Pag-usapan pa namin lang.
Sige.
40 years.
Basta text mo lang ako.
Thank
you then so much. Oo, ingat ha.
He will talk about China, Taiwan.
Okay, 091
Thank you very much.
074
Thank you.
1132.